to tell you my story very briefly, hello? Sorry, guys. Do you know where did you lose me? Where did it cut off? Okay, okay. So maybe if the connection is not best, we can turn off the video. And then if you want to turn off your video, that's okay. Wait, well, let's try. So basically, thank you for inviting. Yeah, should we try like this? Okay. So thanks for inviting me. I'm from Argentina. I have been living in Berlin for the last 3 years after I was forced to leave my country because we were having some resistance against fracking. I was telling you that by profession, I'm a scientist. I spent a long time of my life working in the US, in the Silicon Valley. And after 10 years of doing that, I came home to Argentina to try to build a sustainable community, a self-sustainable community with some nice ideas for local change, like using renewable energies and sustainable agriculture and farming and building recycled materials homes and natural homes like that. And everything was going quite well until the government brought fracking. We happen to be part of the world's second largest shale gas basin and fourth largest shale oil basin that is known as Vaca Muerta. It's bigger than Belgium, which is where I am not now. So it's really a big carbon bomb for the planet and a lot of, no, I don't need it, thank you. It was breaking down, thank you. There's a lot of multinational companies from Europe that are really destroying our homelands. And we built a resistance movement. We published some documents that were revealing the contamination of the water by the first wells of fracking in the area. And inspired by WikiLeaks, actually, that, I'm sure you heard about WikiLeaks. So we made EcoLeaks and we published some secret reports that led to building a lot of resistance because the reports were already showing contamination of the water. And this really helped us build a mass movement. By the way, Julian Assange is just about to be extradited to the US. He is the founder of WikiLeaks. So if anybody doesn't know about him, I really encourage you to find out because it's really crazy what they're doing. And it's really, really serious what is happening for press freedom around the world. And he and WikiLeaks were a big inspiration for us. And look at what we did. Like we were able to build the biggest movement in Argentina's history and I think world history against fracking with more than 50,000 people mobilizing on the streets. It was very, very powerful, but also a lot of us were very persecuted. You know, in the global south, doing activism is not easy. And if you do anything that is threatening the companies or the government, usually you can get killed or put in jail or they fabricate criminal cases. So long story short, to end my personal part of the story, a lot of death threats and criminal cases against me led me to having to leave. And in 2019, I came to Germany, where I have been working with a lot of groups of Fridays for Future and XR and Ende Gelände and many, many others to try to bring visibility about these issues, about connecting the dots with the global south and trying to do anti-colonial actions to fight, because all of what is happening to us is being done a lot by companies from Europe, and it's being done for consumption of those products in Europe. Like right now, the case of gas is a very powerful example because we were fighting fracking, which is the main source of gas. And now, because of the war with Russia, Europe is going to invest so much more money in. Hello? Hey. You want to keep your video off to see if it works better? And I can. Okay, I'll do that. Where did we lose each other? Where I was talking about the corporations. Yes, and basically that is meaning a lot more gas extraction for us. And but basically, I also want to share something positive with you. And all of what I'm trying to explain is that in the global south, we're fighting against fracking and mining and deforestation and protecting biodiversity. And these are very important fights, but they're also very asymmetrical. They're very uneven fights because a little community somewhere in rural Argentina or Colombia or Namibia has to fight a multinational company like Shell or BP or Wintershall from Germany, the biggest oil and gas company of Germany. I encourage you to find out more about them if you don't know, because they are a leading company fracking Argentina, for example. And these fights in isolation are very hard to win because the disproportion of forces is so huge. But then we started to realize something. We started to realize, especially in the global south, all of these fights are connected against mega mining, against fracking, against offshore drilling, and against deforestation. And they have a bigger common denominator that has a financial nature. And that's what this talk is about. So I will jump right into that. In the global south, especially, but not uniquely, we are drowning in debt. Debt is a well-known system of colonialism. It's called debt trap diplomacy. You can even look it up on Wikipedia. There is the definition. And this debt trap diplomacy is a really crazy way where countries of the developed world use these mechanisms of credit and debt to have control over the more impoverished nations and force them to continue extracting more fossil fuels. And this is where this is so relevant to us, to you here in Europe, because this is directly connected and is at the root cause of why the fossil fuel industry continues to expand before our eyes, despite all the demos, despite all the civil disobedience, despite all the articles and social media that we have made over the last few years, and that Fridays for Future has helped so much to build critical mass about, but clearly it's not enough. We are not affecting change at a radical enough level and at a large enough scale. So what is the reason behind all of this? Well, a lot of people in Fridays have great signs that say system change, right? And not climate change, system change, not climate change. And a lot of people around the world, a lot of people want to change the system, but nobody seems to have a clear idea. How do we get started? What is the first concrete step? How can we really achieve something powerful and meaningful quickly enough? Because time is running out. And I'm 37 years old, but I know many of you may be in your early 20s. So the situation for you is even, the prospects for life are even shorter. It's going to be apocalyptic before you reach maybe my age or for your 40s or 50s. So we really don't have time. We have to take this seriously. And what we have found from the global south, but this is a global idea and a global initiative, is that this debt is really at the core of the climate crisis. And to give you a quick example, Argentina, Latin America became independent from Spain nearly 200 years ago, depending on the country. But as soon as we stopped being a colony of Spain, we became a colony of England, a neo-colony of England. And you know how they did that? Debt. So they started making the governments very corrupt, and they helped that corruption grow. And then they were getting these countries into a lot of debt with huge interest that they could never be repaid. So the countries have to spend all of the years just paying back the interest, not the loan. This is important because They don't want you to pay back the loan. They want you to pay back the interest so that they keep making money off of the capital. And also they can restrict your government to tell you what to do so that you don't lose access to the financial markets of the world. And, they dominate. This is why the G7 is so important. This is why what you're organizing in Munich is so important, because the G7 are the parents of these ideas. They created the World Bank and the IMF, which means International Monetary Fund. These are the most emblematic organizations of credit that have kept the Global South. It's a knee on the neck of the Global South. And I hope I'm not losing you along the way. I'm just gonna check a little here and there that you're still there. Can you still hear me? Okay. Okay. And so why is that so important? And for many people in the climate movement, it's pretty new to hear about that. And I think that's really interesting and that's really powerful, because we really need to politicize our climate movement about financial power, because the reality is that a really tiny minority of the world, the top 1% or less, is really ruling the 99%. And we're all divided on all different movements, different ideas, different tactics, and so on. But they're really well concentrated, really well coordinated. And these are the financial institutions of the world that are often ruled by the G7, that have the capacity to decide the rules of the IMF and the World Bank. They have the majority of the votes on those bodies. So what I'm trying to say is the following. The debt functions as a burden on most of the Global South that keeps us from being able to achieve any sustainable goals or any just transition. This needs to change if there is any possibility that we might leave any fossil fuels in the ground and actually start heading into the right direction. I think it's becoming more and more clear for everyone in this meeting and in Europe, the climate movement, that the solutions are very unlikely to come from the same people that made the problems happen. It's becoming very clear that the governments are not working for us, that the governments are working for the corporations mostly and the lobbies behind them that are typing their laws and their programs directly through them. And they're mostly focusing on greenwashing corporate wealth than actually taking any radical steps to achieve like staying below 1.5 degree of warming and so on. So I think it's really becoming more and more evident that unless we, the climate movement, come together in a serious way, in a coalition that is broad enough, that is not just one movement, not just Fridays, not just XR, not just Endegelände, not just whatever, but a global unity of movements is what is needed. And this is what Debt for Climate is trying to start to create. And it's by far not the only initiative, and it's not going to be the only way. But the innovation of this idea is that by connecting debt and climate, many people in Europe, I'm sure you also may agree, that we need to get the workers on board in the climate fight. And in Europe, I know it's really difficult to do that. Many people have tried, or you can get agreement. They say, I agree with you, but that's different from mobilizing 1 million people on the streets for the cause, to really put all the stakes in the fight. That's really difficult to achieve because the labor unions are very focused on very pragmatic and short-term survival needs like food, salary, education, healthcare, and so on. Well, but guess what? When you go to Africa, Latin America, or Southeast Asia, and you talk to the labor unions about debt, they get it. Debt is a neuralgic topic for them because debt is directly affecting their capacity to eat and their jobs and everything. Because, keep in mind, in many of these countries, 50% of the GDP of the country is being stolen from the people to go and pay back the interest on the debt. The debt is so big that the governments are also forced to cut down on social spending because the IMF comes to your country and governs with you. So it tells you, well, you have to reduce pensions, you have to increase the age of retirement, you have to take away subsidies for the disabled, and all kinds of things like this over and over and over again. That's why there's a long history of revolts against the IMF and World Bank, including in my country. When I was 16 years old in 2001, I was part of the mass demonstrations that ended up in the quitting of the president, who had to flee on a helicopter from the presidential palace, and the IMF loan being defaulted on. because it was just strangling Argentina. Unfortunately, 20 years later, it's happening again. We are in a lot of debt, and this is part of the reason that has created this initiative with the worker unions of Argentina. So what we told them, what we're telling the worker unions is, when we connect debt and climate, this can help you in the global south get out of this debt. And at the same time, for the global north, this has a lot to offer and a lot to gain, because this would mean that, imagine that the global south has trillions of dollars of debt and also trillions of dollars of fossil fuel in the ground. And imagine that we could cancel those off. Imagine that just in the meeting of the G7, it's not going to happen immediately. It's not going to happen next week, but we could make it happen if we are millions. If we build over the long term, we could build a strong enough movement to push these demands with enough pressure. They have the power with the stroke of a pen. It could be the quickest and biggest victory in the climate fight, that trillions of dollars of debt are canceled so that trillions of dollars of fossil fuels can be left in the ground. And what that would entail is that there would be a new commitment from the countries that have the debt canceled, that they will use the funds to not extract oil and gas, and to use the funds to fund a just transition, to help them replace the fossil fuel jobs and so on. So it's like a no-brainer, and that's why it's so important that the climate movement can learn about the financial power and about the G7. And we know that it's nearly nowhere near where we should be, because many people don't know even what the IMF means, and they're very depoliticized in that respect. But also, the labor unions are really not politicized about the climate fight really fully yet. But so this is an educational process that we have to do in both directions, and it's already happening. So Debt for Climate has been building for several months since the end of last year, and it's really bringing together more than 28 countries. I think it's going to be 45 actions all over the world. And the beauty of this is there's going to be mobilizations by labor unions, XR, Fridays for Future, the Green Student Movement here in Denmark. I was in Denmark yesterday. There's going to be actions in the centers of power of Europe. There's going to be all kinds of movements and assemblies and indigenous peoples and all over in Africa, Asia, Latin America, in Washington, D.C. against the IMF. And as I said, here in Europe, I will be with you guys in Munich in a few days. And the uniqueness of that is that all of these countries who are facing different kinds of environmental distractions have found a common denominator that could actually bring us together in such a powerful and large scale that is totally unprecedented. Because keep in mind, the labor unions of the world, especially in the global south, they have gone through hell. They have gone through genocides, they have gone through dictatorships, and they have gone through neoliberal periods and governments, and they remain there. They have fought for their rights, and every labor and social right that many of these countries have is thanks to the organization capacity and mobilization capacity of their labor unions. So I think we as a climate movement urgently need that kind of capacity, and also to break out of the bubbles, because in Europe usually you get criticized that Fridays and XR and so on, they're like very middle class white movements and etc. Well, what a better way to break out of that than to start connecting globally with the labor unions. And you may ask me, well, but in Germany it will be hard to connect to the labor unions. It's true. It's also the same in Denmark and in the UK, but maybe that's not necessarily where it will start. But once you can imagine that once the global south and globally the labor unions are coming more and more on board and mobilizing thousands of people, the labor unions of Europe are also going to catch up to that. They're going to be, this is a cool movement. Just like when you guys started and Greta was in the parliament, nobody could expect how things would explode and Fridays for Future will become a global movement of unprecedented proportions. Imagine that maybe something like that can happen with the labor unions as well, and it could happen with the labor unions with Fridays for Future and with the other movements, and that Debt for Climate is a movement that is not owned by anyone. It's not owned by XR, it's not owned by any particular movement, but it belongs to everyone. And the idea is to continue building this We say it's global South led because this is important for us because we are so used to, the colonialism of Europe continues to this day, and it also continues in terms of activism, unfortunately. But even it's not a willing thing. It's just subconscious that it happens. That whatever Europe does, the rest of the world has to do. So we want to change that, and we know that the global South has a lot of great ideas, has the most survival struggles, the most urgent survival struggles, and that's where a lot of power can come from, and really be very inspiring, and also the power to unite, because in Europe the movements are very divided, and it's hard to bring them together. But in my experience, by doing global actions in the last few years with a lot of you, we found that when it comes from the global South, when the request comes from the global South, it's much easier that the movements unite because they say, yes, we have to do this because they're fighting against our companies. Then I don't care if Fridays has a problem with XR or whatever. Let's come together because it's not about XR or about Fridays. It's about the people that are dying, the indigenous people in Colombia or whatever. So I know it's almost 10:30. So I'm going to stop right there. Thank you. Yes, thank you for the question. That's a very important one. So, one of the core principles of the campaign is that it will be decentralized. And it's not like the movements or anyone in Germany is going to tell Argentina or anyone else how to do their transition or how to cancel their debt or swap their debt for climate action. So, a lot of the debts in the global south are also illegitimate, and we are supporting the demands that the illegitimate part of the debt needs to be cancelled unconditionally because it's illegal. Then there will be a large amount that is still not illegitimate that needs to be swapped or condoned so that the countries can take climate action. Now, what will that look like? Let's put an example. Let's say Argentina owes $45 billion to the IMF right now. Imagine that we could show that, okay, half of that is illegitimate and it gets canceled unconditionally, and then the other 25 billion, then there has to be a negotiation, and that negotiation requires the movement that will make this point, will make us get to that point. The movement is not there yet. That's what we are planting the seeds now for. So what we have to understand is that what is at stake is a struggle of power. This is not about the truth. This is not about science. I'm a scientist, and we know that science is on our side. We know that truth is on our side. We know that we are fighting for the interest of the most of the people of the world. But this is not about that because it's power. The reason governments and companies are not doing what we ask is that they have the power not to do that. And the only way to balance this thing that is so out of balance right now is to build mass power on the streets with labor, climate, and social movements together. Then, when you can put that pressure, this will be decentralized. So keep in mind that every country, our governments in the global south are not angels. They are usually working for the companies and for the global north governments that put them in there. They finance their campaigns and so on. So there needs to be pressure from within. So South Africa, Argentina, Namibia, Bolivia, and Indonesia, Sri Lanka, they are working to put power from within these governments to force the government to demand debt cancellation. That's the first step. And then when that happens, the role of us in Europe and in the G7 and so on is to help amplify and visibilize those stories that otherwise would be mostly invisible. Like Sri Lanka right now is in a major debt crisis and barely anyone knows about it. So by putting pressure at the IMF in the World Bank in Washington, D.C., Brussels, London, Paris, and Berlin, and Munich, and so on, we are helping actually hit them where it hurts them and begin to unlock the process of a potential negotiation where the IMF or World Bank will say, well, yes, and you know how to do that. You need to pressure Scholz. Scholz has so much power. Germany has so much voting power on the IMF and the World Bank that if we have enough governments of Europe, like yesterday I was in Denmark, somebody asked me, I said, well, if you get the Danish government to vote in favor of canceling the debt, it's not going to be enough, but it's going to be so powerful, so symbolically powerful that a country of Europe is already on our side. We just need enough governments of Europe to say this is the right thing to do. We vote for debt cancellation, and then we trigger that transformation in the IMF and World Bank that they will say, okay, we hold trillions of dollars of debt, and now let's sit with the governments of each of these countries to decide how we will cancel what Hello? Hey, I just called you via phone. Is that okay? That should work better, but no video. Okay, I'm mindful that we are over time, so we go as much as you guys need to. Got you. Thank you all very much, and I will be seeing you soon. I'll be coming to Munich next Wednesday. I'll be at the demo on Friday, so I'll hope to see you there. Thanks for inviting me. Okay. Bye-bye. See you. Bye.
Sorry, I missed out on what you said. Yeah. Okay. So my name is Gloria Bulus. I'm from the northern part of Nigeria, which is in Africa. I've been a climate activist for a very long time now. I have I run a small nonprofit back in my country, and also a network for individuals, organizations. Leader, I was trained in 2017 in Seattle, Washington State, and I've been the regional coordinator for the African Climate Reality Project, not until 3 months ago that I stepped down as being the regional coordinator for West Africa. And I'm happy to say that I'm an awardee of the Alfredo Sekis Memorial Greenway Award, which was awarded to me by former Vice President Al Gore for being for my work around climate change. It's an award that I hold so dear to me, and it means so much to me because I'm the first in Africa to receive such an award. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sunny Morgan. I'm a climate justice activist from Johannesburg, South Africa. I work with various organizations as a resource. I'm a member of the local chapter of Extinction Rebellion. I'm a climate reality leader trained by Al Gore in 2014. I work with African Climate Reality Project in Johannesburg. I work with EarthLife and with Greenpeace on various organizations, but my recent involvement has been almost exclusively this year around the Debt for Climate program. That's part of my activism. I've been an activist politically and environmentally for over 40 years. In my other life, I own a renewable energy company. I